certainly think what I said could safely be directed towards Professors Kerr and Fischer. And I make no apology for that.
And I'll take the opportunity to respond to your comments. And I will build on Professor Boyd's initial response that, first of all, I'd like to respectfully take issue with the suggestion that either of us here suggested either the encouragement of drug use or legalization. Neither of those terms were used explicitly nor implied in any of the comments we made. I'd like to make that very clear. With all due respect, we live in a society where drug use is actually a reality and encouraged. There's absolutely no reason to differentiate in terms of pharmacology or from a public health perspective between alcohol or tobacco on the one hand or, for example, cannabis use on the other hand. As a matter of fact, if I was raising children and they were asking me should I start using alcohol or tobacco or cannabis, I would probably point to the latter and try and keep them away from the former, simply because they're a lot more hazardous for individuals and communities. What you need to understand here is that first of all, drug use is a reality in Canadian society, and what good policy should aim at is at the reduction of risks and harms related from this reality. And Bill C-15 will not aid that. Even if Bill C-15 would eliminate the availability of all illicit drugs tomorrow, you would still very much be confronted with the reality and the challenge of what you would do with the many people who either demand to use certain kinds of drugs or who are dependent and addicted to them. This bill will not deal with that issue at all. Second of all, there are a lot of Canadian citizens, which you represent actually, who on a daily basis choose to use substances like cannabis as consenting adults or adults who are making free decisions about that drug use. It's a anachronistic and naive assumption to assume that any use of illicit drugs necessarily is bad or evil or leading to harmful outcomes. Just because we have a law that defines illicit drugs in this crude and very illogical way, that does not mean that any form of such drug use is harmful or deviant or even criminal. So you have to first of all realize that there is a demand for certain kinds of drugs, which I think the state needs to somehow wrap its head around how to deal with that and how to take the volatility and the harms out of the drug markets we currently have. And second of all, you need to understand that this drug law, this drug control law, the way it's written, will largely penalize and further increase the severity of penalties for small-scale drug users, dealers, and traffickers who are largely street-level users and who are dependent or addicted, who have a lot of health problems, and whose problems will be further amplified rather than dealt with through additional jail time.
I'll respond briefly as well. With all due respect, I feel that if the message that's been received is that we're stating that drug use should be accepted, then I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Certainly, as a scientist who studies the harms of illicit drug use and as a parent of two young girls, there's nothing more I would like than to see harmful illicit drug use eradicated from society. However, I feel that when we make investments in policies and programs to try and reach this goal, we really have to base those policies and programs on the best available scientific evidence. And interestingly, we've had probably the most large-scale natural experiment happen right south of the border in the U.S., again, where this approach has been widely implemented, massively studied. It's led to racially and gender-based discriminatory sentencing practices overflowing jails. At the same time, again, the U.S. Office of Drug Control Statistics, a very conservative organization that supports incarceration and enforcement as a primary response to drug use, shows that in the presence of mandatory minimum sentences, drug use has increased, price and purity of drugs has declined. So what I'm really trying to say is that we need more effective policies and programs. We need demand reduction. There's a large body of scientific evidence that shows that demand for drugs can be reduced very effectively through evidence-based treatment interventions and through some evidence-based preventative approaches. Again, the scientific evidence in support of mandatory minimum sentences does not exist. You talk about the difficulty reconciling the rationale provided by the minister, and certainly I can see why that may seem a problem, but I want us to really look at the type of evidence being cited by the minister and in the legislative summary that's been issued in support of this document. While I feel that the experiential accounts of police chiefs and police spokespeople may have some value at some level, let's be clear, this is not science. And this is really the best data that has been put forward in support of this bill is these kinds of personal opinions and account. At the end of the day, I'm not personally interested in personal opinion. I'm interested in scientific fact, objectively, rigorously derived science. And again, I think the science is clear here. Our money would much be better spent by investing in evidence-based demand reduction interventions such as treatment and prevention.
Senator Wallace?
Well, no, I'll let it go because we're going to be out of time. No, that's fine. That's fine.